Hello, everybody. What's up, and welcome back. If you're new here, I'm Liz, your host here at Crimes Untold. I know you haven't seen my face in a few days, and sorry if I look pale and tragic. If you're watching over on YouTube, you definitely would see what I look like. If you're listening on Spotify, you probably won't, but if I sound a lot stranger than normal, it is because I am suffering from a concussion. And I don't feel like myself. I do and I don't, but I have to live, I have to do my job, I have to give you crimes that are untold. And in today's episode, we're going to be discussing Martha Rendell. Martha Rendell is a child killer that was the last woman to be killed via hanging in Western Australia. She died via execution of hanging on October 6th of 1909. This was just a few months after she was arrested. She was found guilty of killing her supposed 3 stepchildren, even though her and their father were never married. They just lived together, pseudo-stepmom. Ultimately, she was arrested after the bodies of these 3 children were exhumed and tested for hydrochloric acid. Her modus operandi for killing them was swabbing their throats with hydrochloric acid. Now, we have often heard about hydrochloric acid, but what is it? It is also known as muriatic acid or spirits of salt. More often, this has been talked about being used by Jeffrey Dahmer when he tried to create his human slave after drilling a hole in his victim's head and filling the cavity with hydrochloric acid. Oddly enough, even though this is a strong, dangerous acid, it helps make up part of our gastric acid in most beings' digestive tracts. Kind of gross, but cool. So, back to Martha. I know, I just had to throw some science in there for you. At the age of 35, this is when her spree started, and this was in 1907. She was living with her boyfriend, not husband, Nicholas Morris, and his 4 children. You heard that right, 4 children. 3 of the 4 children would be her victims. The youngest child ran away from her. Smart cookie. Which is the best part about this. It really is that this child got away. So this child ran away and said she's going to kill me like my siblings. It is very well known as well, or was very well known for her to be extremely abusive to these children. So her victims: Annie Morris, Olive Morris, Arthur Morris, and then George, who is the youngest child that survived. So Annie would be our first victim of hers. She was 9 years old. And basically what happened is that Martha would add something to the food that she was serving them. So Annie ate something and her throat started to swell. So she complained about, obviously, her throat, like, I can't breathe, like something's wrong, can you help me? So then Martha would proceed to swab their throat with hydrochloric acid. And she basically said that it was medicine that she was swabbing on their throat. Biggest crock of shit. So Annie's throat was so inflamed to the point that she could not eat, thus making it hard for her to eat, and it caused her basically to starve to death. She died on July 28th of 1907, and her death was ruled to be diphtheria, which is a pretty bad sickness in which you can't eat, so it causes malnutrition, but that is not the case. They'll find out later, though. Next would be Olive. She was 7 years old, and unfortunately for Olive, following the death of her sister Annie, Martha would focus on her. Again, all of the symptoms were the same as Annie, and Olive too would succumb to her symptoms on October 16th of 1907, just a few months later. And again, her death would be caused diphtheria, or be ruled for the cause as diphtheria. Arthur, who was the oldest, so he was 15 at the time, Martha started using the same tactics on him, but it took longer for them to work on him. And eventually, he would succumb to his death almost a year after Olive. So October 8th of 1908 is when he would pass away due to all this. But this time, the medical examiner wanted to perform an autopsy. Well, Martha automatically asked to be there. Strange, right? And she wanted to be present to make sure that nothing would be found, nothing would incriminate her, and that everything was okay and dandy, yada, yada, yada. Thus bringing us to George, the surviving child. So George started being targeted in April of 1909. He would complain about having a sore throat, and this is after he had a cup of tea that Martha had made for him. He started to notice that his throat was swelling and his tonsils were inflamed, and they were like coated in syrup or something. He automatically ran to his mother's house, which was kind of like around the corner, and his father had absolutely no idea what was going on. He just thought, oh no, my kids have died from diphtheria. This is so sad. Now I only have George. Well, the police were called and notified by the neighbors. Apparently, there had been some strange happenings in the Morris household. Harry Mann, who was the inspector for the case, heard that there was constant complaining from these children about their throats and how Martha didn't care whatsoever about their pain. Nope, didn't care. Horrible stepmommy is this case, basically. Apparently, there was a neighbor that saw through a window there was a child screaming at Martha, and Martha was just sitting there laughing at them. And there was another person that said that when they looked in the window as well, she seemed kind of joyous and seemed extremely pleased with herself that one of these children were in absolute terror. Like, this kid was in a terrified, state being around her. Like, clearly something is wrong right there. Well, ultimately, the Inspector Mann, which is really funny because his last name is Mann, and he's you know what I mean. He needed to find George Morris and talk to him, and George Morris, the son, and to see exactly what happened. So he went to George's mother's house and talked to George, and basically George set in stone what happened. And he accused Martha of trying to kill him just like she did with his siblings. He said that Martha killed the siblings and now it's my turn. She was trying to kill me with spirits of salts. So this case kind of took a while to build, and basically it was just to see what else would happen. But during this time as well, obviously they're gathering stuff, they're waiting for her to do something, they're gathering all of their information, and they start to gather the things they need to bring down Martha, including how she bought 3 large quantities of spirits of salts during the time of these murders and when these kids were getting sick. Then they exhumed the bodies of the 3 children on July 3rd of 1909. When they exhumed them and examined them, they saw signs of diluted hydrochloric acid in the tissues of the children's throats. This is when Thomas Morris, her boyfriend, the children's father, and Martha would be arrested for the murders of the 3 children. Now, ultimately, Thomas's case would be acquitted because it's not clear whether he had something to do with it or not, but his case was acquitted. There was a disruption with the jury with this because they wanted to find him guilty of being an accessory after the fact, but it wasn't allowed. She, however, would be sentenced on September 16th of 1909, and she was sentenced to death via hanging at the Fremantle prison, and she would be executed at the Fremantle prison on October 6th of 1909. So that, my friends, is the lovely evil stepmommy, Miss Martha Rendell. Yeah, I hope you guys learned a little bit about this. Hydrochloric acid is not fun in many ways than one, and I will see you guys in my next one.